A new U.S. tariff threat, this time focusing on Canadian fertilizer.
A lot of it does come in from Canada, and so we'll end up putting very severe tariffs on that if we have to, because that's the way you want to bolster here, and we can do it here.
While Trump provided no specifics on what that severe tariff could look like, it would seriously impact U.S. farmers. Currently, over 95% of potash, a key ingredient in industrial fertilizer, is imported into the U.S. 90% of that comes from Canada.
And they start charging and sending very high prices from other countries, whether it's Canada or somebody else. We're not going to let that happen.
Most people think trade wars are fought with tariffs, speeches, and headlines. But the real battles are fought quietly in ports, rail lines, shipping routes, and infrastructure projects that rarely make the news. And right now, far from Washington and Ottawa, in the frozen north of Manitoba, one of the most important economic shifts in North American history is quietly taking shape. This is the story very few people are talking about. For years, the United States and Canada have shared one of the largest trading relationships in the world. Hundreds of billions of dollars in goods cross the border every year. Energy, food, raw materials, manufactured products, the two economies are deeply connected. So connected, in fact, that many assumed this relationship could never be seriously disrupted. But recent years changed that assumption. Tariff disputes, trade disagreements, and political pressure strained what was once considered an uncheckable partnership. The U.S. president's aggressive trade posture toward allies and rivals alike sent a message that even long-standing partners were not immune from economic leverage. And Canada listened carefully, because when tariffs are used as a tool, the target does not just pay the price. The target begins to plan an escape. That escape plan did not begin with speeches. It began with geography. If you look at a map of North America, you'll notice something unusual. Canada, despite being the second largest country in the world, has most of its trade routes running south through the United States. Canadian exports often rely on American rail lines, American ports, and American logistics networks before reaching global markets. That dependence made Canada vulnerable. And Canadian planners knew it, so they began looking north. At a place few Americans have ever heard of, Churchill Port. Located on the western shore of Hudson Bay, Churchill is Canada's only deepwater Arctic port connected to the national rail system. For decades, it was underused, considered too remote and too frozen to matter. But as climate patterns changed and Arctic waters opened for longer periods each year, Churchill transformed from a forgotten outpost into a strategic gateway. A gateway that does not pass through the United States. This is where the story becomes fascinating. Canadian investments began flowing into Arctic shipping capabilities, rail upgrades, port modernization, and international partnerships that would allow goods to move east to Europe and west through Arctic routes toward Asia, completely bypassing American infrastructure. No confrontation, no announcement, just quiet redirection. While political debates focused on tariffs and negotiations, Canada was building options. Because in global trade, options are power. The more routes a country has, the less it can be pressured. The U.S. president's tariff strategy was meant to bring trading partners into line. But in Canada's case, it triggered something else, long-term strategic independence. And the scale of this matters. The trade relationship between the U.S. and Canada is worth hundreds of billions annually. When even a portion of that trade finds alternative routes, the economic gravity begins to shift. Rail contracts change, port revenues move. Shipping lanes evolve. Investment follows new pathways. Over time, this changes who controls the flow of goods. Washington cannot easily stop this because Canada is not breaking any rules. It is simply diversifying its logistics, strengthening its sovereignty, and reducing reliance on a single partner. From an economic standpoint, this is brilliant strategy. From a geopolitical standpoint, it is a quiet warning. It says, if trade becomes a weapon, partners will learn how to live without you. Churchill Port represents more than a harbor. It represents a mindset change in Canadian policy, one that prioritizes resilience over convenience. The Arctic is becoming more navigable. Northern shipping seasons are lengthening. Global powers like Russia and China are already investing heavily in Arctic routes. Canada is realizing it sits in the middle of a future global highway. and that highway does not require passing through the United States. For American businesses that relied on being the middlemen in Canadian trade, this is significant. For policymakers in Washington, it is concerning, because influence in trade often comes from controlling routes, not just negotiating deals. As Canada strengthens its northern and eastern corridors, that influence weakens. This is why analysts say this may be one of the most important infrastructure stories in North America, and almost nobody is paying attention. Because it is happening slowly, quietly, strategically, the US president focused on using tariffs as leverage. Canada responded by reducing the leverage, not with retaliation, but with independence. And the effects may be felt for decades. As new rail links connect Churchill to major Canadian cities, as international shippers test Arctic viability, and as global partners sign agreements for alternative access, a new map of North American trade is emerging. One where the United States is no longer the unavoidable gateway for Canadian exports. This is not a dramatic break, it is a gradual shift. But gradual shifts are the ones that last. By the time they are noticed, they are already complete, and that is why this story matters. Because the real consequences of trade wars are not always seen in the headlines. They are seen in infrastructure, logistics, and long-term planning. Canada is planning for a future where it cannot be economically cornered. And Churchill Port is at the center of that future. For Washington, this creates a dilemma. Pressuring allies through trade can create compliance in the short term. But in the long term, it encourages those allies to find alternatives. Once those alternatives exist, the pressure tool loses its effectiveness forever. That may be the biggest lesson here. This is not about anger or retaliation. It is about adaptation, and adaptation is far more powerful. As the Arctic opens and global shipping evolves, Churchill may become one of the most important ports in the Western Hemisphere. A symbol of how geography, climate, and geopolitics are reshaping the global economy. All because Canada decided it would never again be economically dependent on a single route. And it all started when tariffs made them realize they needed a backup plan, a plan that is now becoming reality.